Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest audio issue of the Shape Journal, continuing the centenary issues on Lenin. So this is Lenin 2, what is to be done now. So last time we looked at the idea that we've been through a century of stasis, essentially, since Lenin died, that we haven't seen the development of this theory that we'd like to have seen, and that it's time to kind of reflect on that 100 years later and work out why that's happened and where Leninism might be able to go next. So we looked at sort of Lenin's political legacy, but also what's often missing from that, the kind of the aspects of Lenin's work that most people aren't that familiar with. We looked at Lenin's contributions to physics, for example, which most Marxists, even ones who call themselves Leninists, are probably not aware of. The next step then, I think, and what we're going to try and tackle in Lenin 2 is looking at, well, where do we go from here? What happens next? In the famous words of Lenin, what is to be done? And I think that's particularly important now, as many of the things seem to be going in the opposite direction. Particularly and with Lenin's legacy. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, the process of decommunization, quote unquote, seems to be, a lot of it is to try and tarnish or remove Lenin's legacy. You see all these pictures of the statues being torn down, and they're of Lenin. So, the visuals that we're getting from the media seem to be saying that we're going in the opposite direction, and that Leninism isn't not only not being advanced, but it's trying to be erased. So how do we counter that, and what is the front line of a new Leninism? Is the question I'd like to put to Jim Schofield, who's been thinking about these things very deeply for many years. And how can we kind of reboot Leninist theory? What's the next stage there? So I'm going to hand you over to Jim now to see what his initial thoughts on that are.
Well, this is a very important thing, I think. It was a great loss to lose Lenin in 1924. It was much too early. If it had lived another 10 years, say, there would have been more people who knew what he was trying to do and would have carried it on. But that didn't happen. So it was a hole. And the proof of the pudding is in what happened since. There weren't revolutions. Revolutions like Lenin was able to lead in Russia, and then in the nations of the Russian Empire, which he insisted had to be independent and not be part of Russia, and have their own revolution and their own, government, which he actually achieved in the main oneness, and bring together in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
And that would have included Ukraine, wouldn't it, in that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Now, the trouble is, because of his death, I mean, people, I don't think know this, but in order to achieve what he did between 1917 and 1924, he had to work 18 hours a day. You don't usually get them talking about this, but it's because whenever he came out with his analysis, everybody disagreed with him. I'm not talking about his enemies, I'm talking about his colleagues. They all disagreed with him. The number of Leninists that were in the Bolshevik Party was one, called Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. That's all. So he had to fight very, very hard, both with his colleagues and with the people, to get what he knew to be necessary achieved. I mean, almost nobody agreed with the fact that he said you should make all the ex-nations of the Russian Empire independent and free.
Yeah, someone should probably remind Putin of that fact.
Yeah, that's right. He knew it was absolutely imperative that they had their own revolution, that they knew what they were doing. They weren't just following a line that somebody else, it wasn't a kind of gift. And it took time and a lot of energy. But he'd go to all these countries and help them to organise their party and fight for the policies. And he'd speak, but it was up to them to make the decisions. They were independent countries. That's the only way you could have a union of Soviet socialist republics. It had to be an agreed thing. Now, as you know, since then, it ceased to be that. When Lenin wasn't there anymore, it became another name for the communist area. It was almost another name for Russia, wasn't it? It wasn't that, and it should never have been that. And there were crucial things that happened, which they should have been allowed to secede. But in a friendly way, yeah? You want to secede, you make your decisions and secede. But secede, and keep links with us because we're on the same fight. And he knew damn well if he did it that way around, it'd be a genuine gain that was made by the people of these independent states who were doing it for themselves. And he knew that was vital. In fact, the most important thing about Leninism is that it isn't a set of policies at all. It's an understanding of what politics really is. It's not a group of experts telling people who don't know anything what to do. It's not that. It's about class. It's about how you maintain a democratic way of making decisions about society that is really felt to be the decisions of the people. That's not an easy thing to achieve. And in fact, later, it wasn't what was happening. It wasn't the decisions of the people. These were not the decisions of the people at large. There were decisions made in committees of the Communist Party.
So do we think that, if we look at the what happened over the 20th century from Lenin's death onwards, particularly in the Soviet Union, but in the world more generally, we had a century where there was a lot of turmoil. There were a lot of attempted revolutions that failed. There was what we've briefly talked about there, which was the change in the Russian Communist Party and the bureaucracy that grew up around that, and Stalinism and all the rest of it. Was it just a lack of theory then? Was it that Lenin's work was unfinished that led to all that, or is that oversimplifying things? Were there other factors that we'd have to, for example, capitalism's repeated attempts to undermine everything that they ever tried to do?
No, I think all those are the things that are correct, but the most important one was the loss of theory.
Mm.
It wasn't complete, you see. What Lenin had to do was invent a new way of trying to find the truth. It wasn't. The truth isn't what most people think. You don't have a vote and you work out what most people think is the case, and that's the truth. That's not how you find the truth at all. And sometimes that is considered to be the truth, and it's called democracy. No, no, no. That wasn't good enough. If you're going to complete the revolution that started with the Russian Revolution in 1917, you needed to use the same methods that Lenin used. And there wasn't a Leninist left, sadly, when Lenin died. There were people who knew a few things that they'd got from Lenin, but there wasn't any, full Leninist like Lenin was. And it's philosophy. You can't underplay this issue. Lenin, for the whole of his political career, knew there was no real explanation for why things happened the way they did. And he said it was vital that we find out why. There was a lot of descriptive sort of work where they noted what had happened in particular places and thought we could do something like that and so on. But that's not theory. And that is not necessarily enough. It can tide you over a period, but you've got to know why things are the way they are. And that was the job of Leninism. That was the job of what he thought was the way Marxism should go. And it didn't go that way.
I think in a lot of the recent recordings you've been making, the importance of why is really hammered home, and that I think that it almost feels like these are two sides of the same coin in a way. It's you don't get a mass of people asking why, and maybe that's where a Lenin is needed, because you need some form of leadership to address why. You can't expect the answer to why to spontaneously come out of a population.
No, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't. In fact, for vast periods of history, you've turned to the wise man who has the answers.
Yeah.
And that isn't what Lenin was. He wasn't a wise man who had the answers. He was someone who knew what the questions were.
Yeah.
And if you didn't answer these questions, you weren't finding out why things behaved as they did. You just had to do that. The old idea of philosophy, of being wise men telling you what to do and you doing it, is nonsense.
But why are why questions so difficult to answer? Because they do seem to be, how and when and what are questions you can answer from observation quite often. Why requires you to have a historical understanding.
Well, it's because there's so much work done which doesn't ask that question. I mean, for instance, I'm a physicist, right? Studied physics all my life. Nobody asked the question, why?
Apart from Lenin.
Right?
Materialism.
No, really they don't. What they do is they ask what's involved, and they find out what that is. And they say, how does it change? Is there a kind of law of change of that thing in some ways? And you can find a law of change, but you only find a law of change in a fixed context. And that's the way it's always been done, not just in science, but in everything.
Politics as well.
Yeah. You find a law of change in a given fixed situation, assumed to be naturally fixed. But that isn't what it is. One of the things about human beings is that they don't just do what's available. They're trying to understand it. That's very unusual. And the point about Marxism and about Leninism is that it's not sufficient to want to get rid of something you don't like. You've got to understand what the history was and how those things came to be the way things were done. I mean, the most important part about Marxism was that the whole history of human beings is the class struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the human beings aren't all the same. You haven't just got clever ones and not so clever ones, but they're all basically human beings. No. You've got classes with very, very different interests and powers. And if you don't make that a very, very important part of the way that you do your studying and your thinking and your analysis, you'll get it wrong.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, if we're talking about, you can have almost like a class analysis of why we don't have the why question enough. I mean, what and how have suited the status quo very well. They suit production well. They suit the interests of the capitalist class well. Whereas asking genuine why questions, particularly about the social world, it presents all sorts of problems for that class system, doesn't it? Because why is essentially critical in its nature.
It is indeed.
So if you're asking lots of why questions, you're going to start to annoy people, aren't you? Why have you done that? Why are you like that? Why have you got all the money?
It is because people think that reality develops rationally according to simple rules. And that if you get somebody who's got an analysis that seems to fit a situation, just extrapolating that will tell you what to do next. That is never true, else you wouldn't have revolutions. What a revolution is, and this has got to be understood, and if it isn't, you'll never get it right. A revolution is when things start to change and they affect one another. So it's not just a collection of things changing, it's changing each other. The actual situation becomes something very different. And what worked before won't work now. It's because you have to be aware of the fact that you're not working in a fixed, given environment. You're working in an environment that seems fixed for long periods of time, but then all the difficulties can start coming home to roost. And one thing changes another, and changes another, and changes another. And what you call a situation when you get an absolute avalanche of change is a revolution. And after a revolution, you can't do the old stuff. I'll tell you something else. You can't even conduct a revolution unless you do it in a Leninist way. Conducting a revolution is seeking the wholly new. You're not just rearranging things to make it better than it was, but using what was there before. No, that isn't what a revolution is. A revolution is when everything comes home to roost for all sorts of reasons. And the only way to solve them is to find something new that's going to be the basis of what you organise and decide to do. Wholly new. Never happened before. That's not easy to dream up, is it?
No, and I guess there's a sense of it's not something that anyone can single-handedly invent. It has to be a dynamic relationship between what's happening within the collapsing system anyway, almost like the natural change of that, and then being able to respond to it on the fly, which is what Lenin did. It was an active theory. It was a theory in the moment, wasn't it? Rather than something that was dreamt up in an armchair far away from the action. He was in the moment and he was responding to things as they happened. And
it's even more important than that. Well, one of the things that why Lenin said you had to make sure that the old nations of the Russian Empire had to be independent was because he said that you can't just give revolution to people and then they just take it on. They have to arrive at it and understand it. So in fact, if you try to work it out outside of the actual revolution, you'll never do it. You have to find it out in a revolution.
And each revolution at a local level will be completely different in terms of the class dynamics, the cultural situation, the economics of it will be different because different cultures and different societies are different.
Yeah. And the actual certainty and confidence and energy that you want in the leaders of a revolution will only come from participating in it. You don't get it given on a plate by someone who's just had one. Sorry, won't work. I would go so far as to say that every revolution, even the revolutions that Lenin was talking about in the ex-nations of the Russian Empire, they wouldn't be the same as what happened within the revolution that he led in Russia itself. No. There'd be different peoples involved and different traditions and different ways of earning a living. All sorts of things would make it different. And they had to find that new, that wholly new themselves. And when they did find their wholly new, and it all cascaded out in a positive way, they'd had a revolution. Otherwise, they hadn't had a revolution.
I think this as well hits the nail on the head of why one, a lot of revolutions failed, and why two, a lot of Marxists and Leninists aren't doing a Lenin themselves. And it's that they forget that you can't just repeat past successes. You can't just apply dogma from the past to now and it will work. You couldn't do 1917 again now. You've got to find a wholly new way of responding to where capitalism is now. You've got to
and it'll be very, very, very different.
Yeah, but it's because I feel like one of the issues here is that theory becomes ossified. It becomes dogmatic. It becomes people just quoting the masters. Here's a Marx quote. Here's a Lenin quote. That's a very kind of academic way of looking at theory. It's not...
And it's not going to work either.
No.
Because the world is moving all the time. That's why these occurrences occur. I mean, revolutions, if nobody tried, they'd still occur, Revolutions would occur. But they might not succeed, and they might not go the best possible way. It depends on circumstances. But they'll happen.
I mean, we've had a series of revolutions just in the last 20, 30 years that have not really gone anywhere, but they've certainly kicked off. Think about the Arab Spring and lots of times where populations have decided to rise up against their leaders, but it hasn't turned into a rise up against capitalism or really a genuine reordering of society in the ways that you would hope. And that seems to happen quite repeatedly, that you get these false starts. But I guess there's the flip side of that is you can see that the desire for emancipation will always be there, and people will continue to try and rise up. And maybe you need lots and lots of false starts before you get movement towards something.
Well, that's certainly
successful.
happened, doesn't it? But at a certain point, and this anniversary for me has been one of them.
Yeah.
You reassess. You say, "Come on, what really did happen? Why did it work so well with Lenin in those few years at that part of the 20th century? And why doesn't it work now? Look at the number of times it looks as though things are going to kick off and they never got anywhere. It's always happening, isn't it? It's happening every few years."
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that this is the difficult balancing act, because Lenin is obviously one of the few people who managed to get this right. But also, at the same time, I think the issue is that people like Lenin become lionized, and then people just try and repeat what he did before, and you can't do that. You've not got to worship Lenin, you've got to become him.
That's right. You've got to be another Lenin. A Lenin for
And you don't
today.
do that. You don't do that by just erecting statues of Lenin and quoting it. You do it by trying to embody that philosophical ethos. And that seems to be the thing that's proven so bloody difficult for anyone else to do. Why haven't we got other Lenins? Why haven't we got other people thinking in that dynamic way, getting stuck into these situations and responding to change with intelligence?
I reckon it's because it's not easy.
Well, no, it's obviously not easy.
I mean, let's say it as it is. A revolution is a seeking in a critical period, crisis period, when everything's going wrong, right, for a solution which has never happened before. You're not repeating something that's happened before. This is new because the situation is new, because the situation has got different emphases and powers and directions and so on. You've got to be looking at the situation to seek what the changes are caused by.
And I think one of the things you've got to seek is, and this is another thing you talk about a lot in the tapes, is contention itself. If there are contradictions, if there are areas of conflict, of things seeming to pull in opposite directions, that's where it's getting interesting. That's where the wholly new might happen.
And that's also where you can go wrong, of course.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the thing about contention, which I always emphasise, is it not only is it a kind of contrast between two opposing forces, which can seem to guarantee no solution, but it's also the possibility of going beyond the situation. It has that inherent within it. Now, and that is what is not understood. If you, this is why Lenin, when he was trying to work out about Russian Revolution, realized that you have to be in a revolution to understand a revolution. You can't sit down and think about it beforehand and crack it.
Or stand outside of it and observe it.
You've got to be in a revolution to have any chance of really understanding it. And the people who think they can bring their knowledge and experience to a revolution and crack it that way are wrong. Because what will be the solution will be wholly new, never happened before. And it's this way of finding, of revealing, and of understanding the wholly new, which is Leninism.
And this is a philosophical approach that doesn't just apply to politics and economics. It's an approach that could revolutionize all understanding and all studies.
Everything, including my subject, physics.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's really missing from discussions on Lenin is that they're always just about the politics. And actually, Lenin was a philosopher, and he talked about a lot of different things. And his approach.
And he had a lot of trouble. I mean, you give the bloke his due. He in the early part of the century, he knew that nobody knew what a revolution really was. He knew it. They didn't understand it. They recognised those in the past, but they were in the past, and people had written about them, and there were static things that had been just described. But as to understanding what the mechanisms of change were in a revolution, there's only one way to understand it, to be in one. Now, the revolution itself, the happening of the revolution, won't be a decision of somebody. Let's have a revolution. Sorry, mate. No, it doesn't happen. You've got to be in a crisis situation, a situation which seems to have no solutions. And it's not just one thing that's come to us a dead end. It's all sorts of things. And they all start grinding to a halt. And they don't work together, and things stop happening. A revolution is a major crisis situation where everything that was going wrong goes to the limit of being wrong. And there will be changes. But what those changes are, the only way you'll understand them is to say, this is going to be new. Watch what's going on. Watch what leads to good things. Watch what leads to bad things. You have to be very, very aware that you're in the middle of a period of mammoth change. And that's why he said this thing about the nations of the Russian Empire. He says, don't, you can't impose it. They've got to find it themselves, or else it won't be a revolution. And it's the same's true, generally. And the sad thing was Marx got most things right, but he couldn't. He couldn't do revolutions because he didn't realise that to understand revolutions, you have to be in them. You have to be in them. You don't do it from outside. And the reason why you can only understand by being in them is because if they're revolutions, they're producing the wholly new. And the thing you said before about all of the sorts of studies are true. If you put it in these terms, it explains a lot of what happens in science. The reason that certain results can't be achieved is because they're wholly new, and they're caused by a lot of things culminating, coming together, and causing a change that you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to go. It's going to be wholly new.
And also science, as it's practiced now, is all about prediction. It's all about, if you can predict what's going to happen, then supposedly you understand it.
That's right.
So if you're talking about situations which are inherently unpredictable, science has no foothold.
No.
In its current way of practice anyway.
No, it's condemnable, I think, when it comes to revolution. You can't use science in a revolution unless you extend the concept of science to include these critical situations, and you know how to tackle them.
And that wouldn't just benefit the understanding of revolutionary situations. It would open up science to tackling areas that it can't currently tackle.
Absolutely.
Which is, how things evolve and change and emerge.
And never has tackled.
Yeah.
Science has piles and piles of situations which they don't understand. And what they do is they don't solve it. they come to a situation which they say, oh, this is all right, we'll have this because we benefit by this. Not everybody benefits. It isn't a general solution, it's a particular one. And they're satisfied with that. But if you really want to make science go forward, you have to seek the holy new. Not seek something that fits in with what you already know.
And I guess that would have to be also our advice for Marxists, for anyone who's still interested in revolutionary action, organisation of working class, anyone who calls themselves a Leninist, they have to change tack and try and seek the holy new as well, because I think there's actually quite a conservative streak in a lot of the left, where people just go over old ground again and again, and are not seeking the holy new, and that's the only way to be a revolutionary, isn't it? Certainly, what Lenin did.
Well, just to be a damn nuisance here, I'll say that since I started this, I've started trying to find out how you apply it to all different sciences that I'm involved in. And I don't know how you can avoid it, really. I mean, I'm supposed to be a physicist, but this is philosophy. And I'm also a sculptor, all sorts of things, a teacher, a lecturer, all sorts of things. And I try applying this to the lot. So it makes it a bit difficult. It's not a nice, easy solution that you just take out of the drawer and use, I'm afraid. Because everyone will have its own holy news. You don't even know what they're going to be because they're wholly new. No idea.
So if we were imagine we have a group of Marxist Leninists in front of us or listening to this podcast, and they're eager to get some advice on what to do next, other than persuading them to embrace the holy new a bit more. What else do you think we should try and encourage in the next generation of revolutionaries and theorists and activists? Because it can feel like an intractable problem, can't it, this?
Well, the thing that Lenin did was he decided to go outside his area and see if he could find answers elsewhere.
Yeah, leave your comfort zone.
And though he wasn't successful in that, going to physics, it was the correct attitude to go to other areas. I think you've got to try and be a philosopher about whatever it is that you're involved in. Not just politics, but as I am, in physics, in history, all sorts of ways you've got to apply these things, and then you'll get a handle on it, and you'll get ideas. If you keep it very, very narrow, tightly constrained to one area, you'll not find the answers.
And also the way things happen in emergent events, it's where things come together in ways that you never would have known or predicted, and start cross-pollinating in ways that you never would have thought of. So, think that all those boundaries between things are potentially collapsible anyway within a revolutionary situation. What you thought were completely separate and siloed things, disciplines, areas, groups of people, all of that can come collapsing down, but in potentially a creative way if you're willing to embrace seeking new connections, because I think that's a big part of what's necessary in a revolutionary situation, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of the things that I'm spending a lot of time on, but I haven't mentioned it here in any detail, is my attitude to contention. because I think that when it's done properly, contention is not only when things oppose one another, but it's when you come to a halt with the normal things that can be done. It comes to a dead halt. It stops moving entirely. And what happens if it is to go forward is it'll go via all sorts of other routes. You can't overcome the direct contradiction. So it'll go left and then right and then up and then down, and you'll suddenly find yourself on the opposite side, and you would never have guessed that would happen. And you haven't overcome the contention by beating it. You've gone round it. You've gone by a diverse route to the place that you were interested in.
And that can create a wholly new situation. I mean, it's for example, like let's think of a contention in nature where you've got a big river and it meets a mountain, and they're in each other's way, and you could say, well, who's going to win that situation? But actually, what would happen is, the river will find all new different ways of new routes that weren't the direct route. And the mountain might change into a different kind of landscape through erosion and its new relationship with the river.
That's right.
So you've got something which seems like a simple contention at the start, but as that kind of situation plays out and evolves, you just get a wholly new situation, a new landscape of possibilities emerges.
And of course, when you look at development as a process, it's always based on contention.
Yeah.
If you don't get contention, you will not get development. It'll stay the same. But contention forces things to stop doing what they were doing before. Either will stop dead and stay there, or something else will happen, which allows something new to occur that before never happened. It can now. And the other thing that's important is that you mustn't see things singly either. When you get in change, it's not one thing that changes. It's when a whole avalanche of small changes take you to a new place. It's not one, it's many.